Turning to an issue now that, as I said at the top of the show, we have not really covered enough on this program, and it would be fair to say that, with the exception of some cases, it hasn't really been covered enough at all in the media here in Australia, and that's the 501 visa clause that sees many residents of Australia, many of them who have been here sometimes since they were only 6 months old, facing deportation for what's deemed to be a bad character assessment, usually as a result of a incarceration or a conviction. But sometimes, as you'll discover in our next interview, this could even be through association or the impacts of crimes committed way back in 20, 30, 40 years ago. In the 1990s, it was around some 70, 80, 90 people were being deported every year. At the moment, 1,000 people, roughly 1,000 people in Australia being deported every year. And these are people who have already done their time. They've already, whatever crime they've committed, and usually these are, more often than not, these are crimes of poverty. They have served their time, and yet now they are facing deportation or being deported as a result of this character assessment. To discuss this, earlier today we spoke to Gerry Georgatos. Gerry's been a long-time contributor to this program, a long-time social justice activist, and he has been advocating for and representing people in this situation. And I started by asking Gerry, I guess, some of the background to a particular case that has recently come to attention, that is of Stephen Poquer, who is a 50-year-old gentleman who is now facing deportation because of crimes recently committed.
Well, what we had in 2014 was 76 people deported from Australia. The year before, it was 80. And on average, about those numbers since the turn of the century. In the last 10 years, we've had about, on average, 1,000 people, 1,000 residents deported from Australia. We now have amongst the world's, and actually the world's highest rate of deportation of people formerly on a permanent status visa or temporary status visa, deported from Australia, higher than any other country in the world that I can actually find robust data on. So no one comes near the scale of what we've got. So Stephen Poquer dared to become part of the invisible, forgotten residents of this country that we now deport at 1,000 per year, which is shocking. Stephen's a father of 6 Australian-born and bred children. 3 of those children are descendants of the first peoples of this continent, and he's the grandfather of 10 Australian-born and bred grandchildren. His mother, who emigrated from the United Kingdom, is an Australian citizen. She took out citizenship. His stepfather, similarly so. His one sister that came with him when he was aged 12 has taken out citizenship. His children and grandchildren are all Australians. He has one other sister that was born and bred in this country. He's Australian, but for a piece of paper. He's committed one offence, and he paid for that offence. He developed an addiction to methamphetamines late in life, and then to pay for it, perhaps he sold or tried to sell some and picked up a 6-year jail sentence, a conviction. He served the most part of that, 5 years, was on parole. In January was to be released. He was transferred by Immigration, Home Affairs, from Bunbury Prison to Yonga Hill Detention Centre Immigration, with the revocation of his visa, the cancellation of his visa having come a few years before. He appealed through all sorts of processes, tribunals and the like, and federal courts under what was then Section 7990, and was let down by the system because he self-represented in the tribunal and did have lawyers for the federal court, wasn't able to get the competence of the Commonwealth and the tribunal and the federal court according to the directions of the time, and has been slated for deportation. But what we've got, what Australians need to understand, is that these directions that are brought on by the ideologue of the incumbent Commonwealth government since 2014 have now slated an individual as failing the character test of 501 with one carceral sentence. We are now demonising every person who has been to prison, and we continue to call people who have been released, who are not criminals, once they've been released because they've completed their penance, as criminals.
So, Gerry, just on that point, I mean, they are people who have been convicted of criminal charges. And to play devil's advocate for a moment, the argument would be, well, why would Australia welcome such people, these people who are, some might say, and it's in the Minister's discretion under the 501 section of the Immigration Act to determine that they are bad characters. But I think what perhaps even a lot of our listeners don't understand is that people who have even committed serious crimes, there's a very important principle of justice here, isn't there, which is, and I'm no lawyer, but my conception of it is double jeopardy. So yes, these are people who have been convicted of crimes and served sentences, but there's effectively being punished twice, a double jeopardy, a contravention of that double jeopardy principle, by then being punished a second time by being deported. And that to me is one of the important, very important, in fact, principles of justice here. You may think these aren't necessarily angels and so on, but they deserve justice just as anybody else does.
All valid points in terms of their deserving of justice and double jeopardy. What this really is extra-legal, it's extrajudicial. It has disregarded the rule of law in this country. That's the problem. We have ideologue ruling the show, and as the High Court has proven, the laws in this nation are in conflict with the actions of the Australian government, and the Australian government has continued to refute the rule of law, even with determinations by the High Court, and has gone about introducing further legislation or further powers to actually attempt to deport these individuals. Let's remember, Stephen Paprika came here as a 12-year-old. We've had other individuals who have come here as 6 months of age, babies, 12 months of age. Robert Taylor, who I supported last year to release, came here as a 12-month-old, and he was to be deported after 55 years in this country, as half a century of life since a child. We've got to recognise that if people come to this country from a young age, we own them. We own them, for good or bad. Their form and content is Australian. They're not owned by their country of origin in terms of birth. They're owned by the nation that rears them. We own these people. They're the circumstance of our nation. So we've got to recognise this. But when we start assassinating, because it's character assassination and demonisation, when we start assassinating people of one carceral sentence and do not allow them a clean slate upon release, and do not respect for what the rule of law is about, a court-ordered sentence that is determined by the rule of law, a court-ordered sentence, and we actually want to punish people further, we are acting outside that court-ordered sentence. We also got to remember that the Prisoner Review Board is a difficult bunch of individuals who are very harsh, historically, in my long experience with prisoner review boards and with people in prison trying to get them released. And I've worked to secure releases of people on compassionate grounds and other circumstances. But I've seen a lot of people held back. They've got post-sentence supervision orders if they think someone is not safe to release without conditions. So all these people who are being released have satisfied the Prisoner Review Board and have done their court-ordered penance. So why is our government acting extrajudicially, extra-legally, and demonising these people? One important point is Australia has 600,000 Australians living who have been to prison. 600,000, and that's 1 in 50 Australians, 2% of the Australian population. Are we demonising the whole Australian population who has been to prison and who has been released And do they carry the badge or the mark of criminality all their lives, or are they no longer criminals? And are they Australian citizens living without prejudice and negative stereotypes?
Gerry, you mentioned before the case of Robert Taylor that you were involved in and supporting last year, the terminally ill 50-year-old man, or I guess he'd now be 51-year-old man, who was facing deportation after criminal conviction. He was given a bridging visa after, his family, the support of people like yourself, made a plea for clemency. In this current case with Stephen and others like him, I mean, I know you've talked about the process by which he's attempted to appeal this decision, but what avenues are open to these people, and what is there any likelihood that in the case of Stephen, in this recent case, that he will be also given a bridging visa and clemency?
I don't know. That's the problem. The whole system is ruled by uncertainty, is mired, I should say, by uncertainty. The inconsistencies are dire and diabolical. Most of the individuals are unrepresented, self-represented, and that's a flagrant disregard of natural justice. It's a difficult... I've experienced this system substantively. Over the last decade plus, I have represented 22 individuals who could get no other representation formal. And I have an impressive record of 21 successful revocations of the cancellation of visas, 21 individuals of the 22 released. And that goes to show that there's a misunderstanding of the loose interpretations of the directions, which include, in the cases that I've supported over the years, Direction 65, which became Direction 79, Direction 90, then we had 99, Direction 99 since January of last year. Now we've got Direction 110. All of them supported the interests of the minor, so the children's interest and ties to their children in this country are taken into account, were taken into account, and all of them supported family ties and tenure in Australia. Direction 99 was the strongest in terms of that. Community safety was regarded in all of them. What has happened with these directions, particularly with 110 and formerly with 90, is that there was a narrowing of the interpretations that the tribunal could have, and pervasive infiltration of the government's bent and ideologue that it should be interpreted that greater weight should be put to community safety, and individuals have, in their view, abrogated that right. But legally, there was capacity for interpretation. Lawyers that I actually asked to represent these people said that there was very little scope, and that I could never get lawyers for many of these individuals. On some occasions, I could, and I got one barrister in particular who's well-renowned to represent a couple over the years. But I've been in the tribunal. I've won cases in the tribunal, and that was against the odds, and that was when it was said it couldn't be done, and particularly under Direction 19. But what we have is a race to the bottom in this country from Labor, the ALP, which is saddening, and the LNP, and they've hit rock bottom. They are at the bottom of the barrel, and now they're slagging each other, who's tougher on people for former criminality, and there's no respect for the law in terms of penance, slate clean, redemption, and people's right to go on.
Gerry, if we could just take a little bit of a step back in terms of looking at this from a more broader, economic and political perspective. From what you're saying there, that a lot of these people can't get representation, at least what I've read in the last day leading up to this interview, a lot of the crimes committed really could be categorised as crimes of poverty, crimes of addiction. We're not talking about people who are millionaires or even really middle class. We're talking about a lot of people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, a lot of people from entrenched poverty, intergenerational poverty that are being affected by these laws. Would you say that in your experience that's the case? And then therefore, to what extent is this just punishing the poor, demonising the poor and deporting the poor?
Ray, even in the tribunal, I've argued everything you just said. I've called what's going on a classist narrative, a puritanical bent. The lowest quintile or the bottom fifth of income-based Australians, the poorest Australians, well, they're not Australians in terms of Australia, sorry, the poorest individuals in this continent from the lowest income base, living well below the poverty line, the significant proportion and the majority and the near all of who come across the Commonwealth, and in terms of these cancellations and deportations. So it's a classist narrative. That's indisputable. These are people who, most part, have not completed a Year 12 education, who have lived poor in difficult circumstances all their life, and who have come from extreme poverty as young individuals, and most of them have come as toddlers. But to actually tell you what the drama of what's going on, you've heard of Robert Taylor, who spent half a century since a baby in this country, and I got him, he's passed away now. He lived 7 months after I got him released, and he spent that with his family. I've got individuals inside who have been in there who actually have only served 6 months incarcerated but had a 1 year sentence. So the 1 year sentence, even whether it was parole, or another individual who had received a suspended sentence and had not served carcerally that time, but it constituted that he could be incarcerated. And the other individuals I want to mention, there are individuals who have not been incarcerated or not committed an offence, and this will surprise you and your listeners, since 1986 and 1981. 4 decades. 4 decades have passed. And another one in 89. They've been claimed up too. They've been picked up for former associations. We've got a 67-year-old, a 68-year-old and a 69-year-old in Melbourne immigration who have had a clean slate for 40 years, and they've been slated for deportation. Can you believe that? So they've been character assassinated from offences in the 1980s. So their cases have been referred. I've talked to all of them, referred to the Commonwealth, to the Minister for Immigration, and they've slated them for deportation. So what we have going on in this country is a Kafkaesque system that is not brought through any examination at that time that these assessments are being made. And they're being referred by the Department of Immigration and Home Affairs, and the visas are cancelled at that point. Mm-hmm. So there's no legal scrutiny. There's no tribunal to assess these revocations. They're coming out of the office of the Commonwealth Government. And that's what's disturbing and alarming. And I don't know how to be any more alarmist than that.
Certainly, Gerry. We are going to have to leave it there, but just, I guess, quickly and finally, obviously with Indymedia, we often like to leave our interviews with a final question of what can be done. And, it sounds like obviously you're very much involved in a position of advocacy and representation. But for our listeners, is there anything you can suggest they do if they're concerned about these the 501 visas, the impacts it's having on people, particularly, as you say, the sort of the classist narrative that's ongoing? What can people do in order to potentially provide some support to those that are being affected by the situation?
To be honest, right now I'm working to try and propose reforms for 501 to get what can be done to bring them back to what they were at least in 1998. In 1988, under the Howard government, they had been encumbered then too. But at that time in 98, we had 10 years. If you had lived in Australia for longer than 10 years, you could not be deported. And that was because of family ties. We've taken that away. We've got to try and get it back to that. And then we reduced it from 24 months of incarceration to 12 months. We've got to try and get it back to what it was before, so we've got some protections for people who have family ties to this country. We shouldn't be shredding families. That shouldn't be the societies that we have. What Australians and residents of this country can do is push for the inclusion in the potentially soon-to-be proposed Federal Human Rights Act in this country to include protections for residents, people who have been in this country for a long stretch of time, whatever that period may be deemed, and to push for that. The other thing is they should pummel the federal government as best they can with as many emails and letters as possible, and all the elected officials, because there are individuals who surprise me in the ALP and in government in general who have been quiet and have shut their mouths in this popular scandal to try and win government by sacrificing these individuals, that they're tough on crime. They need an education in the shift of public consciousness. They're to pummel their members of parliament and to get them to stand up and break like Petro Georgiou did in the coalition over the scandals of Tampa and the CVEX.
Yeah.
And lastly, I've got to say it, the Greens have to stand up. I'm sure as individuals they're saying something, but the Greens and the Independents and these Teals and they've got to speak up, and they're not speaking up to the extent that they should. They're not proposing anything. They're not holding government to account. They're just not speaking up, and I expect better of the Greens at least, and some of the Independents, and they should be pummeled to speak up, and they've got the understanding of what's gone on. But we are sacrificing these people. But in the end, if I can get 21 out of 22 released, it's a shame and an indictment on our nation that we don't reform these laws that see in no other record like mine in what's been going on in Australia, where more than 90% and close to 95% are being denied and deported.
That was Gerry Georgatos speaking to us about the situation of many in Australia, many people who found themselves facing deportation because of character assessments under the 501 clause. Very, very important and significant issue. And just want to say on a personal level, a lot of respect to Gerry Georgatos. He's been a long-time contributor to this show, a long-time social justice activist. But yeah, as Gerry said there, it's something that really needs to be brought up, and we urge you all to do that.